Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our annual One Book, One Jewish Community Book Read. My name is Randy Zucker, I'm the Director of Arts, Community, and Culture at the JCC. Joining me is Karen Sanders, the Assistant Director of Cultural Arts at our JCC. And I want to wish everyone a very happy Hanukkah. We hope that the light of the menorah provides a sense of peace and comfort during these difficult times. We hope and pray for an end to the war in Israel and peace, and we stand strong in our support for Israel and the Jewish community. We recognize that this is a busy time of year, and we appreciate the ability to pivot when needed to accommodate life's unexpected challenges. I'd like to introduce Lisa Bleich, our amazing in-house moderator and the chair of this committee, the One Book Committee. We are so lucky to have Lisa, and she has inspired many readers and has enriched our author series with her leadership. We are eternally grateful to her commitment to the JCC and to our reading community. And thank you, Lisa. I am bringing you up. You're on.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Randy. That's so very kind of you. It's my pleasure to be the chair of the One Book, One Jewish Community Book Read and all of the other reading events that we have. And I thank you, Karen, for all of your support. This is the One Book, One Jewish Community Book Read is a very special event because it is highlighted by the collaboration of our community partners. So before we begin, I'd like to just take a moment to thank and acknowledge them. Our partners include the Jewish Book Council, Temple Emmanuel, Congregation Beth Israel, Temple Shalom, Temple Beth El Makor Hayim, Temple Beth Or Beth Torah, and the JCCs of Metro West and Middlesex County. We are so pleased and honored to have our guest tonight, which is our presenter, which is Martha Hall Kelly, who is the author of The Golden Doves. Martha is joining us this evening from sunny Florida, but she's originally a native of New England. Her debut novel, Lilac Girls, was an instant New York Times bestseller when it was published in 2016. And following that success, she went on to write two prequels, Last Roses in 2019 and The Sunflower Sisters in March 2021. And I've read all of the books and they're all really amazing. And so if you haven't had a chance, I would definitely recommend that you pick those up as well. This year's One Book selection was unanimous, which is The Golden Dove. It's an extraordinary novel inspired by true events. Two former female spies bond together by their past, risking everything to hunt down an infamous Nazi doctor in the aftermath of World War II. It's filled with intrigue, a little bit of romance, and a lot of historical interest. So we're very, very pleased, and please join me in welcoming Martha Hall Kelly.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here with you. So I'm going to talk for maybe 35 minutes about Lilac Girls and also my new book, The Golden Doves. That's so nice that it was a unanimous pick. That makes me feel so good. But yeah, I usually, when I speak to an audience, I ask people to raise their hand if they've read Lilac Girls. But, you know, usually most of the audience raises their hand. So I'm going to just assume that, you know, a huge majority of us have read Lilac Girls already. And now, you know, after reading The Golden Doves, that there are a lot of characters that overlap in this, especially some of the characters at the concentration camp at Ravensbrück. So I hope you all enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, it doesn't matter what it is, you know, I'd love for you to ask it at the end during our little discussion, Q&A. So Lilac Girls, oh my goodness. I have one slide. I don't have a whole presentation. But I do have my one slide, and it shows kind of the progression of the journey. And I didn't start writing until I was, goodness, into my 50s. And it all happened in such a magical way. Sometimes I think it was kind of meant to be, but it all started with a magazine article that I found in Victoria magazine. And I loved Victoria magazine. They still publish it sometimes now. And I carried it around in my wallet for weeks, months, really. It got like smooth and shiny. I carried it around so much. And it was about this woman named, oh, there we are, about Caroline Faraday. And I'm going to start with this slide from the upper left and kind of progress around down the bottom in a counterclockwise way and end up back at the Bellamy Faraday House again. But it was a really wonderful article, and you see it there in the upper left, and it showed Caroline Faraday, and she was this wonderful socialite from New York City who never married. She had a summer home up in Connecticut, in Bethlehem, Connecticut, where very close to where I live now in Connecticut, which is Litchfield. And she loved lilacs, and she and her mother collected lilacs from around the world, very special specimen lilacs, and brought them back to that house in Bethlehem. And so that's what the article was about. And it had a little picture of her and about the house she called the Hay. And I always wanted to go there. So the story starts in 2000, my story, in 2000, when it was Mother's Day, and my mom had just passed away. And I was very sad. And my husband said, why don't you go up and see that house you've always wanted to go see? And he was, of course, talking about the Bellamy Faraday House, because he had seen me carrying around that article for so long. And he did not have to ask me twice. I had 3 little kids, and I had a long career as an advertising copywriter. I had 2 journalism degrees, one from Syracuse and one from Northwestern. I never became a journalist, but I learned a lot about research while I was in journalism school, which became helpful. But out of school, I became an advertising copywriter, writing commercials and TV spots and print ads. So one day after my 3rd child was born, a boy, I had 2 girls and a boy, and my son kicked the slats out of his crib and walked out. And I just thought, I have to stay home with these children. He was a handful. They all were, they were really energetic and creative, and they still are. And so I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was very happy, playing tennis and taking care of them and taking them to school. But I always felt like something was missing. Although I thought, okay, now my career's over and it's time for me to really invest myself in these kids, which I was doing. But the day that I went up to the Bellamy Faraday House, he said, just get in the car and go. And I just thought, you know what? I love my husband. That is like the nicest thing anyone ever did for me. And I went on the tour that day of the beautiful Bellamy Faraday House, which you can see at the top of the screen there. I love old houses and I love gardens. I don't really like gardening because I don't have the patience for it, but I do love to look at gardens. And so I was the only person on the tour that day. And I saw the garden and I thought, oh, well, that's lovely. And then I went inside and I thought, well, for my $3, I'm gonna, take the tour. And they provide a docent and they take you around the house as, like any house tour. And that day I was really lucky because I was the only person on the tour and I got to ask all sorts of questions. And it was a really interesting tour about this woman who had done such amazing things. And I felt that her story really got lost. But it wasn't until the second floor of the Bellamy Faraday house where they have Caroline's desk out on a landing. And it's one of those big desks from the like 1950s. And it had her big old Remington typewriter on it, and pictures of Charles de Gaulle and Napoleon Bonaparte. She was such a huge Francophile. But I was drawn to a small photograph of, say, 50 or so middle-aged ladies lined up in rows for photograph. And I asked the docent, who are those women? And she said, those are the rabbits. They were Polish women, just Girl Scouts. The youngest was 12. They were arrested after Hitler occupied Poland in their hometown of Lublin, and they were just Girl Scouts, but they were arrested and sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp in Germany. And there they were experimented on by the Nazi doctors at the camp, and their legs were opened, and they experimented on them using sulfa drugs to see if it would cure battlefront injuries. And Caroline had a good friend who was at Ravensbrück at the time. Her name is Genevieve de Gaulle. And you'll find Genevieve right under Caroline's picture in the collage. That was Charles de Gaulle's niece. Of course, a very prominent French woman who had been in the underground and arrested and sent to Ravensbrück. And she became friends with these so-called rabbits, these 50, or there were actually 74 to begin with, Polish women who were operated on at the camp. And the ones that survived, about 52 of them, went back to Poland after the war. And, in some ways, Russian-occupied Poland was, worse than Germany for them under Stalin. But Genevieve reached out to Caroline, who was her friend, because Caroline spent a lot of time in Paris. And she said, can you help these women? They are behind the Iron Curtain. They have no medicine. Can you bring them to the United States, do you think? And Caroline, and if you've read Lilac Girls, was an amazing woman. And she did just that. She went behind the Iron Curtain. She brought the women to the United States for the trip of a lifetime and rehabilitation. That's what Lilac Girls is about. If you look at the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see some women, young girls. Those are Girl Scouts. Those are the rabbits when they were in happier times, when they were younger. And the woman in the front left, her name is Wanda Patalska. And she was the last of the so-called rabbits. And she just passed away at 102. Really, really sad. I had gotten to know the last of the surviving rabbits. It was a very, very sad day when that happened. It was last year. But I thought it would be nice to show you what these women looked like when they were just kids. And that's, it wasn't that long after that photograph that they were arrested and sent to Ravensbrück. So anyway, I discovered that story up in Bethlehem. And back in those days, you could buy lilacs that were propagated from Caroline's, and you'll see that in the lower left. And I brought my lilac home that day, and it was perfuming the car as I drove back down about an hour south of there, back to my home in Fairfield. And I just kept thinking, why did that story just get lost? Because I knew it had been in the New York Times. I knew that Caroline was amazing, but nobody knew about that story. And I thought it was really fascinating. So I started going up there and just researching. And I did that for a really long time. I did it for a few years until my husband took a job at the Weather Channel. And we moved down to Atlanta, Georgia. And I was the weird northern lady and had no friends, which sounds sad, but it's actually good if you're going to write a book. And I had met a woman who was absolutely wonderful before I left. And my husband introduced me to her after a Broadway show that we went out to. And her name was Betty Sargent. And I started telling her about the rabbits and my research and all this stuff. And she said, well, you should write this. This would make a great novel. And by the way, did you know that I'm a book editor? And she said, did Mike tell you I'm a book editor? And I said, no, he did not tell me. And she said, well, you should write this. All I need is a chapter. And I just thought, I don't know I'm not James Patterson. I don't know anything. I only know how to write, like newspaper articles. I didn't take any kind of creative writing in college, but I tucked that away. And I moved with my husband down to Atlanta, where he became the CEO of the Weather Channel. And we brought my son, the slack kicker, Michael, with us. He was in the early stages of high school at that point. And one day I took him to school and I dropped him off, and I went through the Starbucks drive-through, as I always did, and ordered my decaf cappuccino grande. And by mistake, the barista gave me a caffeinated one, and I went home and Lilac Girls just started coming out. It was unbelievable. It was like, I don't know, some sort of ecstasy or something. It was just one of the happiest moments of my life. I felt like suddenly I could like play the piano or something. It didn't come out in a perfect way. It needed a lot of work. I worked with several editors on it, and really, it took me 10 years to write. But it was such a wonderful thing when that just started happening. So I did a lot of research. I realized I wanted to write it. I had just read The Help by Catherine Stockett, and I loved it. And I loved the 3 different point of view characters. And I thought, I want to do the same thing. I know Caroline's kind of inner voice, but I didn't know anything about Germany or Poland. So I thought, I have to go there. So I bribed my son, not my proudest mother moment, but I said, you can have 1 beer if you come with me to Poland and Germany. And because, it was legal there, and he was 17. And he got very enthusiastic about the trip after that. And so we had this amazing trip to Poland and Germany. And we went to Lublin, where the girls were from. I got to meet in the lower left-hand corner. That is a picture of Stasha, another one of the so-called rabbits that I met at Ravensbrück, and unfortunately she passed away a few years ago. We were just such good chums, very funny, even though, she didn't speak English and I didn't speak Polish. Through a translator, we had some good times together. But anyway, I went over there and went to Ravensbrück, and it was, of course, not, it was a hard thing to see the camp, especially after I had studied these women and knew what they went through, and all of it is still there. But it was such an important trip. And I came home and wrote Lilac Girls, or finished it. And we all know the end of the story. I mean, there's been 2 million copies of it sold now, which I still can't really even process that, because somebody sent me a picture from the gift shop at Dachau and said, oh, look, here's your book here. And it was just such an emotional moment, because I just thought, I think maybe somebody somewhere else helped me write this book. I don't think it was just me at all. But anyway, the picture at the very bottom of the screen is a picture of some of the rabbits that Caroline brought out behind the Iron Curtain, and she brought them on the trip of a lifetime. And the woman at the bottom, her name is Anja. I cannot pronounce her last name in Polish, but she's a Polish American who was at Ravensbrück. And she knew them. She wasn't a rabbit, but she knew these Polish women that had been experimented on at Ravensbrück. And she got out early, and that was their moment to all be together. And once I saw that photograph way back when, I just thought I always want to write about, someday I want to write about an American who was at Ravensbrück, because I thought it was fascinating. There were 5 different women that were imprisoned there. One was Fiorello LaGuardia's sister. You may have read, there's a book about her, which is fascinating because her brother would not pull any strings for his sister, which I always thought was so, I mean, weird, because he could have gotten his sister out of a concentration camp, but he said, no, I can't be seen as showing favors. And so she eventually got out. She was married to a Jewish man. Anyway, so I was fascinated with Americans at Ravensbrück. And I also wanted to write a book, I thought someday when I go back to writing about World War II, that kind of picks up the threads of all the things that had been kind of left in Lilac Girls. And one of those things was Herta Oberhauser. And you know now that you've read Golden Doves, what happened to Herta Oberhauser. As a refresher, in Lilac Girls, Herta was the only female doctor at the all-female camp. There were 100 doctors at Ravensbrück, which is so mind-blowing. Only 2 of them were, I thought at the time that I wrote Lilac Girls that she was the only female doctor, but there were actually 2 doctors that were female there. And I just wanted to wrap up what happened to her, because so many people reached out to me after Lilac Girls and said, what happened to, I knew that Herta had been sentenced to 25 years, but what happened to her? So I thought it would be really interesting to show that in this book, in The Golden Doves. And of course, you know that Josie goes to visit Herta, and we find out what really did happen, and happened to so many of the Nazis that were imprisoned for their crimes against humanity after the war. And one of those was Klaus Barbie, and he's on the lower right there. And we, of course, all know about the Butcher of Leon. And the reason he's here is because he inspired me to write about all the Nazi fugitives who got away with murder, literally got away with murder. Again, back to Genevieve de Gaulle, I found out later that Caroline and Genevieve, through their correspondence, Caroline had 3 archives, and one was in Nanterre, France, outside of Paris, and I spent a lot of time there. And I found massive amounts of correspondence between Caroline and Genevieve about Klaus Barbie. They were Nazi hunting. They were trying to find him. And they eventually did uncover a lot that led to his trial and execution. But I always thought I really want to write about all of the Nazi fugitives who got out of Germany without having to pay for their crimes. And of course, you know from reading the book that some of them did that by coming to our country in something called Operation Paperclip, where almost 1,000 men came. They were scientists and doctors in a covert program through the US Army. And you see that in the upper right-hand corner. And once I dug into that, I could not believe just how, and there's a reason why they didn't tell the American people while it was happening. And just when I was writing this book, a lot of the CIA documents had just been declassified. And because it was so hurtful that they had taken these scientists who had done such horrible things and just gave them a free pass to live in this country. And the story in the book is true about the real life rabbit, Nina Ivanska, who came to this country to visit Caroline, and these Jewish doctors at Mount Sinai, not Mount Sinai, at another hospital in Boston, came to Nina when she was there getting a procedure and said, look at this medical journal. Do you know who this man is? And it was Walter Schreiber. And he had operated on her at Ravensbrück. And she looked at him and said, how is he here in this country? He did such terrible things. And once she broke that story to the Boston Globe and the FBI got involved, they quietly, the US Army slipped him away to Argentina. And I just thought, I know it's water under the bridge at this point, but I think the people in the world should understand what went on, and you cannot just sweep this under the rug. There were so many men that, got away with things. So the other half of that was the Nazi rat line that you now know about because of the Golden Doves. And that was men like Klaus Barbie who evaded capture by coming down through Germany and from prisons and POW camps and escaping through Italy by the help of the Vatican and the United States government. Usually in this talk, I can't talk about that because it's a bit of a spoiler. The fact that the United States helped these Nazi fugitives like Klaus Barbie and Mengele escape through the Nazi rat line. And, their feeling was the devil, they wanted to vet these guys coming through to see if they could use any of the information that they had, and they were afraid that the Russians would get them. So they figured better to bring them to the United States where they can, bourbon and barbecue at the army base versus letting the Russians get them, because some of them had some pretty, damaging information. Hitler had been trying to deploy a plague bomb. If he had, he was very close to doing it. He just didn't know if he could keep his own German people safe from it. So he was legit trying to kill the rest of the world except for Germany. So it was scary stuff that the US didn't want the Soviet Union to get. But anyway, I know I need to wrap this up soon, but the other photographs there are the wisteria. There is the picture of a French cafe that I based Arlette in the book. The two characters, Arlette and Josie. Josie's, of course, half Jewish, and her father was an ambassador to France. And Arlette was French, but really grew up in Germany. I love that in a character when they're kind of, they have one foot in Germany and one foot in France. It creates a lot of conflict just internally for them. But that is a picture of a cafe that I went to in Paris when I was there researching, and based Arlette's cafe on that. Now, after reading The Golden Doves, I'm so jealous because people have been texting me and sending me messages from this place, which is so amazing, saying, oh, we're visiting here and it's amazing because after reading Golden Doves to see it here. But I love every text that I get. And lastly, down below that to the right is my character board. And I just include that because I like to show people the characters as they were in my head when I was creating them. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner that's Natalie Portman, one of my favorite actresses. And I had her in mind when I was writing the Josie character, and my husband's favorite character. The whole time he reads all of my chapters as I'm going. In the book that I'm writing right now, he is first in line for chapters. Actually, I think it was Lilac Girls, he was on a plane from London. He does a lot of international traveling, and he was crying. I can't remember which book it was, but the stewardess came to him, or the flight attendant came to him and said, "Oh, are you okay?" And he's like, "Yes, I'm just reading my wife's book." But he is my biggest, he calls himself plot whisperer because, at night we'll have a glass of wine and talk about plot. But from the get-go, he loved Josie the most. That was his girl. And I had a thing for Arlette. I still do. I think she's an amazing character. And just the fact that she had a baby in a German Lebensborn home, got out of there with him. I mean, I had 3 kids, but I could barely, throw the Cheerios on the tray of the high chair. I mean, it's hard being a mom. And so I felt like Arlette, even though she's fictitious, I think she was pretty badass. And then below that are just Luke Minot. There's a actor that, kind of represented what he looked to me. And then Romy Schneider in the middle, you may recognize her. That may be dating me a little bit because, she was an actress in the 50s and always one of my most favorites. And she, to me, was Danae. And it's so fun to be able to talk about spoilers. I can't usually do this, but of course, Danae, at the end, we find out that she really is Dr. Snow. And so the whole time I thought, how can I make her really so that people don't see that coming, and make her really beautiful and like a wonderful French woman. So I hope you were surprised by that. I want to hear how people like the ending. And then, of course, to the right of that is Theo James. So cute. He was, I don't know if you saw White Lotus, but he was the one of the guys in White Lotus, kind of a bad character. But he was also in Sanditon, which is a wonderful Jane Austen novel. It was her only unfinished novel. And of course, they made it into a wonderful TV show, and he was the lead in that. So I've always loved him. But of course, my husband thinks every male character, like Aaron in this book, who I think is so attractive, he always thinks it's him. And I never have had, like Paul in Lilac Girls, he's like, Paul's me, right? Because Paul loves wine, and so does my husband. I was like, okay, yes, he's you. But anyway, so he thought he was the Theo James character too. But anyway, so I see that my time is almost there, so I'm going to wrap it up. But I just want to say, if in the future anyone ever comes to you and says, I think you should go up and see that house you've always wanted to go see, or that museum, or you should write that book you've always wanted to write, do it, because you never know. It may be your second act.
Well, thank you so much. That was so inspiring to hear your journey for Lilac Girls and then through to the Golden Doves. And it is a really amazing story how you were able, and just how popular your first book was out of the gate. So just really, are they making that into a movie yet? Lilac Girls?
What is her name? Elizabeth Moss optioned it, from Handmaid's Tale. She wanted to play Herta, which it would have been great, but she tried to sell it in Hollywood and she didn't have a buyer.
Interesting. I'm surprised because it was such a big seller. Well, maybe Hulu will take it up as a mini.
You never know. All the Light We Cannot See now I haven't seen it. Have you seen it?
I did not watch it, but I've heard it's very good. A lot of people have really enjoyed it. Yeah, people have enjoyed it.
And I think, if that gets popular, and Hollywood's weird that way. If something is a big hit, then they'll go looking for other world.
Right, exactly. They'll look for something to mimic it. Right, exactly. I was just wondering, well, I'm assuming you were writing this during COVID because it was.
Yes.
So how was it when you were writing during COVID with this idea of biological warfare?
Ugh,
You know, in the story, like how much, and you said that this did actually happen during the Nazi regime, and that was something that could have
yes.
possibly happened.
It was so weird. That happens with me with my books for some reason. They kind of come true. It's weird. I was
Yeah.
writing this before COVID happened. So
Okay.
it just was like life imitating art. It was very strange. And my kids were home. My oldest daughter, the one getting married, and my youngest, my son, the slack kicker, he they were both home with me. And so that really influenced it. My son is a science person, so I could turn to him for a lot of that. And but yeah, with COVID happening, it was so weird. It really felt kind of creepy that it was all happening again, this like terrible virus. But I also felt like I wanted to travel so badly. And that I think is why I took the plot in such a like Josie goes all over the world,
Right.
Arlette
Yes.
America,
Yeah.
and they were traveling, and I really, lived vicariously through them.
And was French Guiana a place where a lot of the Nazis went? I mean, I know a lot of them went to Argentina and South America. Did they also go there to French Guiana?
They did. They went all over South America, really interestingly. I had researched a place called Colonia Dignidad in Chile too. And that's
Mhm.
really what I based my camp on, my French Guiana camp on, this place in Chile. I don't know if you've seen Sinister Sect. It's a show on Netflix, and it's based on the true story of this man who was drummed out of Germany. He was a Nazi fugitive who had opened weirdly an orphanage in Germany, but was drummed out of Germany for kind of abusing the children. And he took them all down to Chile. And the girls and the young girls, he put them separately, and very similar to the way that I drew it in the novel. But he raised them with Nazi ideology, and they finally found him, and they got rid of him. But the kids are now, they did a documentary of the children who grew up in that orphanage, and it's fascinating, and it's called The Sinister Sect.
Hopefully, did he try to impregnate them with his own sperm like they were doing in the
Not,
in
I
that book?
No, but if you watch the series, it's really, there's a lot of creepy stuff in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the idea of Golden Doves was obviously something that was based on reality, but in terms of the young girls being spies, so Josie and Arlette become spies when they're 17 years old. They're really
Yeah.
young.
Yes.
They obviously are not really trained to do this, and they just take it on themselves and they do a great job. Was that work, women or people that young being trained to be spies or being brought in to
Yes.
be spies?
Yes. I thought that was fascinating, especially in Paris, because the Germans had such incredible technology to hunt down the radio operators. And so they had basically, this is horrible, but killed them all, because it was the most dangerous job in the underground, because they would drive around in these big vans around Paris. And the minute they picked up a radio signal, they just went right there and they executed whoever was doing it. So I based it on Virginia Hall's novel, or not novel, but memoir, A Woman of No Importance. And she was a little bit older, but she was an American who was a spy, a radio operator in Paris during the occupation. And it was an unbelievably dangerous time. And towards the end of the war, they got to the point where they were using anyone that they could find, the elderly, really young people, and some of the bravest people.
Wow, that's crazy. Um, I just want to say, if anybody has questions, please put them into the chat and I will make sure to get to your questions. And I will keep asking questions until someone else puts something in. One of the things I thought was really interesting, on page 26, you have Johan, who's the spy that's working along Josie. and they're talking about kind of the mentality at that time. And I think he says that, not excusing her at all, but it's a disturbing psychological fact that participation in mass murder need not require emotions as malicious as one might think. Given the right circumstances, it's easy to kill. Can you talk a little bit about the sentiment, and did it change as you were writing the book and doing research for the book in terms of how you viewed this idea?
Well, that's one of the things that I realized. I did a lot of research during Lilac Girls on that. I started out with Herta Oberhauser being a very kind of cliched character. And then my agent, in order to represent me, said, my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And since I was 14, I've read every Nazi memoir and trying to figure out why. Why did they do this to the Jews? Your women are not Jewish women, but they went through the same kind of persecution. Show me with the Herta character how that came about. So I spent a year in order to get published, going back and digging into National Socialism from a female point of view. And I think especially with women, it was very easy for them to do this thing called doubling. And they would take part, or I'm sorry, not women, doctors. They would take part of themselves and just stay, kind of their normal life. And they would create this like double personality that did all the other terrible stuff. So they weren't necessarily sociopaths, the way that I started out Herta's character. I ended up making her much more of a normal person because I realized they weren't born monsters. They were inculcated. It was like a cult in a way, Hitler, and they were at just the right age. Herta was like 16, 17, 18 when she first started, getting the idea of going to medical school. And she was right at the heart of, National Socialism and Hitler's rise to power. And it's terrifying how easily they kind of just slipped into that.
Right. And it's interesting because later on in the book, when Josie's interrogating her, she says, Victor writes history, but I was not guilty. So that's kind of is she sort of justifying that, like, if they had won, then she would have been seen as a hero?
Oh, totally. And, that's what I thought was interesting about, Lilac Girls only goes to, right after the war. But I thought it was really interesting how Germany, once they got some power, West Germany, they went to the US and were like, you know what, we're just taking everybody out and letting them go. Because they knew that Americans wanted to move on and that politically it wasn't a good idea to, hold on to that. Of course, certain people in the US wanted them to hold their feet to the fire, but they were more afraid of Russia and, the Cold War and what was happening there. So people had kind of forgotten, sadly, in the 1950s and 60s about the war, and they moved on. And that's why people like Klaus Barbie and Mengele, they were living happily in South America. And in the case of Mengele, of course, was never caught.
Right. I know it's sort of, there's this moral murkiness that, in sense, that all the major players have, because as you say, World War II was ending, the Cold War was developing, the Allies were turning into foes, and it seemed like, well, whoever's going to be the greater power is going to take that knowledge or that evil, whether it be evil or not, regardless of what the past implied. How do you think that's still playing out today?
Well, it makes me realize, with all the American stuff with the CIA and everything, with them helping the Vatican get Nazis out, I just thought, we don't know anything that's going on. Every time something happens in the news, I think, well, that's what they want us to know. But that there's just so much that's going on behind the scenes. But I also think that, the whole idea of Hitler and the cult, I think that, that if we allow that to happen again, there's a playbook in a way. And I think, it's gonna keep happening unless we know about it and can go, wait a minute, like just from my own research from writing this book, like every day with the news, I go, oh, there you go. That's a Hitler thing. So I think we
Right.
just have to be aware and not just kind of take somebody's word for it, because we get into these silos. And that's something I talked about in Lilac Girls, how Hertz's father had cancer and he was dying, but he read everything. He was just very well read, but the mother only listened to Nazi radio. And I feel like that was 2016. I was writing about that. And I feel like you just have to make sure you really, really know what's going on.
Right. And I think it's, this book kind of magnifies how hard it is to know whom to trust. Josie doesn't know if she can trust Ariana or Aaron or Carl, for that matter. Arlette wants desperately to trust Luke and Danae to find her son. So how are you playing with that theme of trust and kind of subterfuge and just all of the different ways that people were misrepresenting themselves?
Well, I really wanted to show the truth of it. And in all my research, that really, there was so much uncertainty. And that was a big part of why people were so nervous during the war, because they never knew what to think. It's funny, a friend of mine reached out from my old town and she said, my mom and her mom both read Golden Doves, and they wanted me to tell you, you really captured what it was like during the war for them, because they were always uncertain and always afraid. And she said that was something that they hadn't felt since the war. And I just thought, wow, I mean, I'm getting chills just talking about it. I feel like that was the scary part of it. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And it wasn't like today where, we have the internet, or, I mean, literally you can just think about it and it appears, I want to look something up on the internet and it's like live footage of something. But back then, you really, it took weeks to get information. And, letters sometimes, someone would be killed in action and you wouldn't know for a long time. So I really wanted to capture that in the book.
I still feel like even though we have all this information today, we still have that sense of uncertainty and that sense of, because there's too much information, so you don't really know what you can
Right.
trust, you can't trust, and how you puzzle through things
Right.
that
There
are
was
going on in the world.
really nice about now I'm writing a book about another book about World War II on Martha's Vineyard, and there was something really nice about the idea that when you listened to the radio, you knew, and who knew if that was really the truth, but there was only one version of what was going on. If it was, in your country, yes, there was propaganda from different places. But in general, if you heard Walter Cronkite or, any of the big reporters back then, it was such a trustworthy thing. Like I remember growing up, when you'd hear Walter Cronkite, he was, I don't know, like you just believed him. It was pretty amazing. I miss that, honestly.
Well, yeah, well, it was nice to have some, at least to, whether the certainty was true or not, at least you could feel that it was, right?
Yeah.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process, and in particular how you did the research? You talked a little bit about the book, but I'm kind of the research for the book, but I'm kind of curious to know what most surprised you while you were doing the research, and what changed your mind about the psychological impact of war and of everything that happened to those people.
Hands down, it was how they got the Nazis out of Germany, both through the rat line. And I had known about Operation Paperclip, how they brought all those guys over. And that wasn't as surprising to me, but it's still, Annie Jacobsen's book, Operation Paperclip, is so good. It reads like fiction if you haven't read it. It's just bizarre and so chauvinistic that these men in the military just did this. They forgave all of those Nazis that had done such terrible things and brought them over to just, they made that decision for us. And I think that was, really unfortunate. The other part of it was the Nazi rat line, where the United States helped the Vatican bring these men dressed sometimes as like monks through Rome all the way down. I mean, I went over there. The first thing my husband and I did when the COVID travel restrictions were lifted, we went to Italy and we traced the Nazi rat line from the Golden Cross, which is where Mengele stayed, all the way down through all the places where these guys stayed, and even to Rome. There's a giant church, and also they kept them at the Vatican. And it just, the whole thing to me as a Catholic was so horrifying that they participated in that and that the United States funded it. And it was just really depressing, to be honest. But I still, and some people go, why do you even care about this? This is over. But it's really, I think it's important, for them to just not get away with it, because I really believe in justice. But also, I think we have to look at that and go, what do we think about that? Is that okay? Do we want that to ever happen again? Because if you don't know about it, I think it just tends to repeat itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's definitely true. Well, it's interesting because a lot of Jews also ended up in South America after the war.
Yes.
And yes, one of those is Karen, whose family was Chile, right? Your family is from Chile, yeah. So so there's a lot of South American Jews. I actually work with a lot of them, and I'm wondering, did you ever, in your research, did you ever find any tension when the Jewish refugees ended up there and then recognized or realized that the Nazis had followed them? Not specifically, but were there.
No, but I think that would make a great book, because
especially if one of them was a marriage. There you go. You could have two characters where your next book, Martha, write it down.
No, but really, I didn't know that, but I never ran across any kind of conflict there. All I knew about was the Mossad, when they were trying to find Mengele. Like, I did a lot of Mengele research only because I was just like weirdly fascinated with, why did they not find him? It shouldn't have been that hard. So that was more, I know there were a lot of Jews looking for him, but it didn't seem like the United States was real. I think there's way more to that we just don't know. I don't think the US was really, putting its shoulder behind that. And when you look at guys like Schreiber, who, this is a true story, they snuck him out of the country once they found out that Nina Ivanska ID'd him and said, hey, he did the surgery on me at a concentration camp. His underling was executed. Why is he like hanging around at a, army base? And they were like, oh, good point. We're going to just like send him on a boat to live with his daughter in South America. If they did that, I don't know. I don't think they were looking that hard for Mengele, who in my brain is number one. I mean, why they did not get him, I don't know. He was petrified the whole, he died of natural causes, but he was petrified the whole time they would find him.
Yeah, interesting. Who are some of your favorite authors, or whom do you read for inspiration?
Oh my goodness. We were just talking about Ann Patchett. I love Ann Patchett. I think that, when I read Bird by Bird, that's kind of an author's rite of passage, is you read Ann Patchett's Bird by Bird, which is about writing, and she's so funny and so lovely. Yeah. I have loved everything that she wrote, and I have not gotten to read Tom Lake yet, but I'm dying dying to read that. So unfortunately I'm up to here with a deadline on a book, so I can't really. And it's hard to read fiction when I'm in the middle of a book, especially
Yeah.
World War fiction. But that is one that I am desperate to read. Oftentimes for kind of solace, I'll go back and reread my old favorites. I just, before I started writing this book, I read Cider House Rules again.
That's a great book. Yeah.
John Irving. Yeah.
Yeah.
And oh my God, I love that book. I just love his writing. So I'll go back and reread even Jane Eyre. That was one of my mom's favorite books. For a while, I was on a kick of, my mom had a library of her favorite books before she died, and I was going through and reading every one of those, and Jane Eyre was one of them. So yeah, sometimes I just go back and read the classics.
Great. All right. Well, we have time if there's any, like, for one question, if anyone has any questions, anyone wants to put it in the chat. You could also just unmute yourself and ask a question.
There
if you
is
like.
one question already in the chat from Anne
I can see.
Rosenblatt. She said, I've enjoyed reading all of your books. What is your next book about?
Oh my goodness. I wish I could show you my screen that has it up there. It is about World War II on Martha's Vineyard, 1942, about two sisters who I can't tell you too much, but there were a lot of U-boats around there. And some Nazis got off of the U-boats onto Martha's Vineyard at different points. So it may have something to do with that. My mother grew up on Martha's Vineyard, not a wealthy summer person, but they were kind of poor, living on a farm. So it's inspired by her life. She used to stand at her gate and watch all the soldiers go by in the convoy up to the army base on Martha's Vineyard. And she said a lot of those guys were there practicing. They didn't realize it at the time, for Normandy, because they had beaches and cliffs and things. And then when 50% of them almost didn't come back after the war, they were so devastated because those were their boys. So that's what I wrote a book about. And it's called, I'm going to read it so I get it right. The Martha's Vineyard Beach and Book Club. It's about these sisters that start a book club on Martha's Vineyard during the war. So it's been so much fun. I've been doing a lot of research with book clubs too, so it's been a lot of fun.
Great. Well, we would love to have you back to talk about that one, and I'm
Oh,
sure
I would
read it.
You'll
Well,
have to
thank
come
you
to Martha's Vineyard for the book launch.
Yeah, that sounds good.
on.
All
We're
right.
in.
Awesome.
Randy, we're
Thank you
in.
so much. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation and presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. You're the best. And thank you for reading twice. You're amazing.
My pleasure. Thank you for writing something I could read twice. That's good.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you, Lisa, so much for a wonderful and engaging conversation. Martha, thank you so much for giving us your time and your sharing your stories and your creativity. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you
And
so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome.
We'll see you
It's
next
our
time.
pleasure. Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to all of our One Book readers for their hard work and dedication to making these great programs for us. Everyone have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.